Every single day, the entire east coast of America depends on one tunnel. Not a network, not a system. One tunnel, dug under the Hudson River in 1910, 2 years before the Titanic sank. It has no backup, no alternate route. More than 400 trains squeeze through it every day, carrying the workforce of the richest city on Earth. And after more than a century underwater, battered by salt water, corroded by time, flooded by Hurricane Sandy, engineers agree on one thing: it's living on borrowed time. So why is New York still gambling everything on a tunnel older than the Titanic? And what happens the day it finally gives out? Here's what makes this terrifying. That tunnel sits on a 10-mile stretch of rail that moves a region generating roughly 20% of America's entire GDP. If it shuts down, the damage doesn't stop at New York. It ripples down the entire East Coast, Boston to Washington, within hours. Which is why New York is now fighting back with more than $35 billion. Not one project, 3 separate megaprojects, attacking the same weakness from 3 directions. The biggest, the Hudson Tunnel Project, $16 billion for a brand new twin tunnel crossing. That's more than the cost of building the world's tallest skyscraper, 10 times over. The second piece is already done. The Long Island Railroad spent $11 billion, over a decade of work, tunneling 2 new miles under Manhattan to connect Queens directly to Grand Central. It was supposed to relieve the pressure. It helped, but it didn't touch the real problem under the Hudson. And the third, Amtrak is preparing to spend up to $8 billion rebuilding Penn Station itself. One of the busiest transit hubs in the Western Hemisphere, where hundreds of thousands of people pass through every single day. 3 projects, 1 10-mile stretch, and a clock that's been ticking since 1910. To understand why New York is digging all of this at once, we need to go back to a decision made more than 100 years ago. In 1910, the Pennsylvania Railroad built the original tunnel using the shield method, crews digging by hand inside a giant steel cylinder, installing cast iron rings behind them as they went. They only built 2 tubes, one in, one out. That was enough at the time. It never got a third. For over 100 years, every train between New Jersey and New York has squeezed through that same 2-tube bottleneck. Then, in 2012, Hurricane Sandy flooded both tubes with corrosive salt water. The tunnel survived, but the damage never fully went away. Today, engineers warn that without a new crossing, the old tunnel could eventually fail entirely, with nothing to replace it. There's an even stranger story beneath the East River. Engineers began building the 63rd Street Tunnel in 1969 to one day connect the LIRR to Grand Central. But its clearances were locked in by that 1960s design, which means entire classes of LIRR trains, including its diesel locomotives and double-decker cars, have never been able to fit through it. New York built a tunnel that parts of its own fleet can't use. Here's the challenge: you can't close the existing tunnel to fix it. There's only one other tube, and it can't carry the region's rail traffic alone. So a new tunnel has to be built first, bored beneath one of the most densely built cities on Earth. Threading between foundations, subway lines, and utilities never mapped this precisely. Even the ground fights back. Near Manhattan, the Hudson Riverbed isn't solid rock. It's soft, shifting silt. The natural consistency of the bottom of the river is sort of like chocolate pudding, said Steve Sigmund of the Gateway Development Commission. Left alone, it would collapse around a boring machine. So crews built a cofferdam just to work in calm water, and even then, only part of the year, because federally protected sturgeon migrate through that stretch to spawn. Then there's the money. It doesn't arrive as one check. It comes in pieces from federal, state, and local governments, each of whom can walk away at any moment. That agreement isn't guaranteed. In October 2025, the federal government suspended funding for the Hudson Tunnel Project, forcing a construction halt by February 6, 2026, idling nearly 1,000 workers. Courts intervened, and by February 24th, funding was released and work resumed. Proof of just how fragile the financing behind a $16 billion project can be, even after ground has broken. And even when money is secured, the agencies don't always agree. Amtrak owns Penn Station, but the MTA's Long Island Railroad has a lease running through the year 2186, a lease so long it outlasts everyone alive today and their grandchildren. That lease gives the LIRR veto power over construction in the very station Amtrak is trying to rebuild. The challenge isn't just engineering. It's keeping 3 mega projects, run by 3 agencies, financially and politically alive at once. For the Hudson Tunnel, the solution is 2 new tubes stretching roughly 2.5 miles from the New Jersey Palisades to Manhattan, bored beneath the riverbed by tunnel boring machines launched from New Jersey. On the Manhattan side, crews spent years building something even more unusual. A massive concrete casing underneath Hudson Yards, poured in place long before the tunnel itself, preserving an underground path for the future crossing beneath an entire neighborhood of skyscrapers. For East Side access, engineers took a different route, literally. They extended the LIRR 2 miles east from Queens, repurposing that decades-old tunnel under the East River. The payoff? A new 8-track terminal buried beneath Grand Central, giving Long Island commuters a second way into Manhattan for the first time in the railroad's history. And for Penn Station, the plan isn't another tunnel. It's a complete rebuild above the tracks. A single open concourse with natural light, replacing the cramped, low-ceilinged maze that sat there since the original building was demolished in the 1960s. Engineers are also planning something New York has never fully had: through-running trains that pass straight through instead of stopping and reversing, freeing up capacity without a single new track. Every one of these projects has gone over its original promises. East Side access was expected to cost around $3 billion and open in 2009. It opened in 2023 at roughly $11 billion, 14 years late and more than 3 times over budget. The Hudson Tunnel Project nearly died in court. After the funding freeze shut down construction, it took a federal judge to force the money loose. And months later, another ruling permanently barred the government from cutting it off again. A $16 billion project, saved not by engineers, but by lawyers. Penn Station's rebuild has a developer, but still no locked-in budget. New York withdrew over $1 billion it had once promised, and so far only about $240 million in early-stage federal funding is committed, a fraction of the $7 to $8 billion the full project needs. Even the plan to run trains straight through the station is contested. One consulting firm hired by the railroads called it time-consuming, costly, and disruptive, warning of a decade of disruptions to rebuild the track layout. Part of it is technical. NJ Transit runs on overhead power, the LIRR on a third rail, systems that don't easily talk. Part of it is governance. 3 agencies share one station, and none can force the other 2 to agree. The biggest risk to all 3 projects isn't underground. It's above ground, in budget fights and lawsuits that can stall a tunnel as effectively as a flood. If all 3 succeed, New York ends up with something it's never had in over a century: a rail network with real redundancy, able to survive a disaster instead of being crippled by one. If they don't, the region stays exactly where it's been since 1910. Dependent on aging tunnels, millions of daily commuters, one failure away from a crisis with no backup plan. New York didn't get here by ignoring the problem. It got here by building just enough to get by for 100 years, and hoping that would always be enough. This time, the city is finding out what it actually costs to stop hoping.